We are back here on the Analyticaliowan podcast. It is Saturday, June 5th, and we've got a lot to talk about because there is always a lot to talk about. Now, where to even begin? There's always so much. Um, so this comes from the Hill. This is where I'm going to start, I guess. Donald Trump has a new pick for the Director of National Intelligence. Uh, Acting Director of National Intelligence, Bill Pulte, uh, and he told Donald Trump says that he wants Bill Pulte to shrink the size of the office because it's too big. Now, President gave the Wall Street Journal this interview. Um, Now he is also going to remain the head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. So he's going to hold two jobs, which means he probably won't be able to do either well, as anybody who has ever been forced to do jobs can attest to. Um, when you're forced to sit there and take on two roles, very few people can actually um, handle it. I've seen it happen time and time again, working in retail, etc., where one position goes away and they say, "Oh well, we'll just add your responsibilities over onto somebody else," and well, they can handle both, and then that person doesn't get either one done nearly as well as it probably should. Um, but they go, well, it's just fine. Corporations have been doing it for a while now, where they like to shrink their payroll by saying, well, we can get rid of a benefited full-time position and we'll just, shift the responsibilities of this job over onto other people. We'll separate it out, and suddenly there's one less person. Some of the companies I've worked for have done that, where they said, well, um, we don't want to have that many full-time employees. One retail establishment I worked for, um, when I started, they had like 60 some full-time positions. By the time I left, I believe they were down to something like 38. Um, and it never seemed to correlate that the ones that were left were actually making better money. Uh, but they kept saying, "Well, we don't need this position. We don't need that position." Um, was told when I left that particular job. Actually, I was told all the way through with that job that if you ever leave and or you decide to step out of being a benefited employee, the chances of you ever getting those benefits back are slim and nil. At least at the time, that company did not want to give out the benefits. They wanted to use a lot of part-time employees. But anyway, got myself sidetracked. Um, Now, Bill Pulte is director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. Uh, he's used to refer mortgage prosecutions for mortgage fraud of Trump's enemies. Trump told the outlet, "I'd like to see it smaller. I think there's a lot of people in there that shouldn't be there." Donald Trump has no clue. I guarantee you he has no clue what we need when it comes to national intelligence. One, he doesn't know what intelligence is um, because he doesn't have any. But jokes aside, um, he doesn't know. He doesn't understand how hard it is. Apparently, uh, I remember there was a while back when um, there was some information that this administration had let out about informants and things like that, and suddenly a lot of our informants went missing. Um, Now, Trump said that Pulte will not be in the role permanently, suggesting he does not plan to nominate him for a position that would require Senate confirmation. So, what he's going to try to do is go, well, you're going to be the acting head for now, get this job done, and then I'll put somebody else in there. Um, and one of the other reasons he is doing that is because a number of GOP lawmakers have expressed opposition to Pulte serving in the role. But he told the Wall Street Journal that serving on an acting basis would be an asset because he would still have broad powers. He said, "You're less shackled." This is what Trump said of it. "You're less shackled. It sort of gives you more power, for a somewhat limited period of time. Frankly, it might be good for him to shake it up before people come. Because if he reduced the size in conjunction with me, and in conjunction with possibly the person coming in, he can do a lot of the hard work and we wouldn't have to saddle somebody that goes in." Does MAGA hear what he says and think he's intelligent? I mean, that's a serious question. When he says that, that's not even a real sentence. And I realize I ramble when I'm talking, but I'm not the president of the United States. I don't claim to be a super genius. I don't claim to be the smartest person in the room. Donald Trump does. In fact, he is not nearly as articulate as he even was during his first term. Now, during his first term, I still said I need a roadmap to get to the end and to the point during his speeches, but it's getting worse and worse. Now, if it's only an acting capacity, he is limited to 210 days, um, because that is the legal limit before Congress must act. Trump made references to the Department of Education, a department he wanted to eliminate, seeming to even suggest the same should happen within the Office of Director of National Intelligence. "We've made the Department of Education much smaller, and likewise, this should be much smaller." Trump reportedly referring to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and this should maybe even be terminated. Terminated. We'll make that decision. He's talking about terminating our national intelligence. He doesn't know what this does. I guarantee you, he does not know what the Office of the Director of National Intelligence oversees when he's talking about eliminating it. Now, the uh, Office of the the Office of the Director of National Intelligence oversees the constellation of 18 U.S. intelligence agencies, but it's unclear what power Pulte would have to carry out firings at other agencies such as the CIA. Again, that's one of the things. A lot of the other agencies, they are, while under the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, they are also completely and totally separate. Now, Tulsi Gabbard had her own plans to reduce the size of the Office of Director of National Intelligence, saying she would slash 40% of the agency staff and otherwise cut or reassign its various offices, including those monitoring foreign influence operations. Trump also told the Wall Street Journal he hopes Pulte will follow in Gabbard's footsteps by releasing more classified information about the 2020 election. "I should say everything. He should look at everything and make a determination," Trump said. So, first of all, they want to cut a bunch of staff from an agency I guarantee you he has no idea what it even does. And now he wants to once again go back and look at the 2020 election. Why is he so obsessed with 2020? Because he cannot accept the fact that he lost. That's it. That's the total picture. Donald Trump thinks so highly of himself, and his ego is so easily damaged and broken that he cannot accept the fact that people do not like him. This is one of the reasons why he is railing so hard against the midterms. He is pushing to oust certain Republicans that he thought weren't loyal enough, and he values loyalty above all else. He needs people around him at all times, kissing his ass, telling him he's a genius, agreeing with everything he says, and as his dementia gets worse, this is going to increase. He is going to need to do something along the way. All right. Now, he wants to relitigate 2020. First of all, he has never showed any sign of proof. The closest thing to proof he has ever said is he talks about how the votes are counted. That's it. And what happened in 2020 is similar to what is going on in California right now, in part because of mail in balloting, in part because of how many votes are cast. It takes time to count the votes. But what Donald Trump would have is he wants all votes counted by 11 p.m. Eastern on election day, and anything not counted to him is fraud. Doesn't matter that places like Hawaii, the polls would still be open. Alaska, the polls would still be open, I do believe. Could be wrong about Alaska, but still, even for Hawaii, because of time zones, the polls are even open at 11 p.m. Eastern. It takes time. But see, Donald Trump doesn't want to deal with that. And in 2020, what happened? He spent the run up to the 2020 election from about April, May, all the way through the election because he was so terrified of the pandemic costing him a reelection campaign. And he was afraid that the economy was going to take a shit because of the pandemic. That is why they pushed after 3 weeks of uh, uh, it wasn't quite lockdown, but where they encouraged everybody to stay home. Now, MAGA will tell you it was a lockdown and it was strictly enforced and you were arrested if you were outside. No, you weren't. You could go outside. You were encouraged to stay home for public safety. MAGA took it to the extreme because it sounded better. Because it sounded like they were persecuted that way. They've got a persecution complex. And some of that has to do because MAGA is deeply tied to Christianity. And I've talked about it before. And growing up very religious, um, we heard about all of the saints growing up Catholic and about how great it was that they were put to death for their religion. And that is the ultimate thing you could hope for is to, you know, have to stand up for your convictions. And MAGA has a persecution complex that way. They feel that way. So Donald Trump was trying to get people to have more confidence in the economy, in the fact that the COVID pandemic was going to go away. It didn't really go away too far until after Donald Trump was gone. Now, yes, he did push to get the vaccine out. But the thing about that, the irony here, is he wants credit for Operation Warp Speed to get the vaccine. Oh, it was so great. They got the vaccine out in record time. But then because it was pushed to be taken under Joe Biden, Donald Trump and a lot of Republicans, Donald Trump, who he himself, I believe, did get the vaccine and had COVID, want you to believe that there's something wrong with the vaccine. There was nothing wrong with the vaccine. It was perfectly safe. But see, they want you to think that there's a problem with it. And you want to know how I know there was no problem with the vaccine? Who were the first people to start to get the vaccine? The very first people? Politicians, rich people, influential people. And then they pushed it out. And I know that one's going to say, some people are going to say, well, that doesn't, show that it was safe. They gave it to the military. But I don't think they would have given it full to the military, uh, specifically as some of the first ones if it wasn't safe and they weren't confident in it, because they always need the military to be ready. why would they compromise the entirety of the military? But anyway, that's another rabbit hole to go down another day. So Donald Trump was paranoid about the 2020 election, where I was going with this, and he was afraid he was going to lose. So he pushes against everything and tells people to, you know, be confident, go out in public, do all this. And then he turned on mail in balloting and vote by mail. Oh, don't vote by mail. It's so fraudulent. It's so fraudulent. Vote same day, vote in person. So what happened? MAGA voted in person, same day. A lot of Democrats voted by mail because we understood it, we trusted it. Now, I just voted early. I didn't vote by mail. I just went and voted early. Um, but didn't matter, right? You go vote. Um, Now, a lot of states put in place rules about when you can count ballots and when. Uh, Pennsylvania, for example, one of the highly contested states in the 2020 election. I remember hearing about this all day, every day, and having to argue about this well before I was ever doing this on social media. But one of the things with Pennsylvania is they weren't allowed to open, sort, handle, do anything. They couldn't touch the mail in ballots the way I understood it, the way it was being reported during the 2020 campaign until after the polls were closed on election night. And then they were required to count same day ballots first. Well, they count the same day ballots first, and then they counted the rest. But Donald Trump would scream fraud. And now he's having his handpicked temporary head of the Department of National Intelligence, or the Director of National Intelligence, go in and relook at the 2020 election. And I say this a lot. He is doing this to set up his narrative for why he lost. Now, two questions again, and I'm going to ask this. I've asked this before. I'm going to ask it again. When it comes to the idea that elections are somehow unfair. One, why is it only ever elections that he loses that are rigged? Two, if the Democrats were so good at rigging elections, and now Donald Trump would tell you he won by a landslide in 2024. But if the Democrats had the capability of rigging elections, why couldn't they rig it when a Democrat was in office? And why wouldn't we have President Kamala Harris at this point if the Democrats could rig the election? See, none of it makes sense, but MAGA doesn't care. It makes sense to them because didn't like the outcome. But they treat voting like picking a sports team. And if their team wins, they're happy. If their team loses, they're pissed off. And it doesn't matter to them what the reality is as far as what their favorite sports team when it comes to politics is doing. Doesn't matter if the side that is supposedly on their side and the side they picked, if they're the side that's screwing them over every single time, they don't care because they're winning. And they find ways to explain it away and to justify um, how everything is going and somehow blame everybody else. I've seen it around here numerous times when you getting to talk to somebody about politics in a red county, even here in Iowa, red town that votes Republican up and down the ballot, county Republican, the person they've sent to the state legislature Republican. Ask them, things suck around here. Why aren't things getting any better? Oh, it's those damn evil Democrats in Washington, D.C. Every time. Every single time. They won't ever admit their side is the problem. Too much identity politics when it comes, and they treat politics like a sports team. Speaking of sports, I don't normally talk NBA. NBA Finals is on. Game 3 of the NBA Finals is coming up. That is happening on Monday. And Donald Trump was being asked about that, and he said, uh, well, he was asked, let's see if I can, about the ticket price, because tickets are going from anywhere from 88,000 to $50,000 a ticket or more. Now, Donald Trump is planning to go, and he was asked about the cost of the tickets. He said, they can watch it on television. It's sort of semi free to watch it on television. That's the way life goes. That was a direct quote from the President of the United States. Now, Joe Biden wanted to address the ticket prices and go after places like Ticketmaster and some of the other markets for ticket prices. Um, Now, this comes from The Hill. Fans of major sports in recent years have complained about the rising price of attending games in person, particularly playoff and championship contests. Supporters of football clubs around the world have been outraged at ticket prices for the World Cup matches being played in North America this summer. At the same time, the cost of watching live sports has steadily climbed over each of the last several years as more media companies move games away from traditional broadcast to streaming and behind paywalls. The the NBA finals are being broadcast through ESPN and on ABC, which is still available over the air through by antenna. The Knicks are playing in their first NBA finals in decades. Many New Yorkers have taken uh, to city streets to watch NBA games on large screens at viewing parties across Manhattan. Trump says, if the team wasn't a big success, you could go very easily. So you can do that too, but that's the way life is. Basically, he's saying, I don't care. Now, I know he doesn't set ticket prices itself, but many presidents have had opportunities and offers to go watch varying games, championship games for varying sports, whether that was the World Series, whether that was the Super Bowl, whether that was the NBA Finals. And they've mostly always turned it down. Now, Donald Trump keeps going to these events because it gets him out in front of a crowd, and he thinks it is going to, be amazing. Now, the funniest thing could happen here. He could get there, go to game 3 of the NBA Finals, and the crowd could just boo the shit out of him. And that would be funny to me. That the crowd would just completely destroy him. And his ego would have a hard time with that by, hearing the crowd. I mean, that's what was happening when he went to, was it the Super Bowl this year? Um, and somewhere else, he got booed like no other. Um, and his ego couldn't take it to the point where he had to leave early. But he's just like, yeah, it's just the way. That's just the way life goes. They're doing good. You can't afford ticket prices. Who cares? Who cares? And what does he care? If he goes, which he says as of right now he's going, um, he's going to have a luxury box, and it's going to be a whole thing. You know, he'll be able to sit there in a nice luxury box, surrounded by his security, and it won't cost him a penny. Whereas people who have been fans of teams like that for years won't be able to afford tickets. All right, moving on. Let's skip to this one here. One of the things we had heard about uh, Donald Trump and his plans for the economy when it comes to gas prices was drill, baby, drill. And he was going to get the oil companies to drill more open more wells, and it was going to be great. We were going to have all this oil flowing through. Well, that didn't ever happen. They didn't want to drill more. And since then, he has started a war with Iran and closed the Strait of Hormuz, causing oil and gas prices to skyrocket. Now, some of our oil is getting sold, depleting reserves we had here. And that happening, well, it's not going to help us when gas prices continue to spike. But Trump administration on Friday auctioned off rights to drill in a pristine wildlife refuge in Alaska, but the lease sale attracted only 2 bidders on a few tracts of land. Of about 60 tracts of land opened up for leasing by the Trump administration, only 5 received bids. Only Hex Energy and the state-owned Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority bid on tracts. Now, they got $3.7 million, half of which will go to the state of Alaska. Friday's auction advances Republicans' long-awaited and long-delayed goal of drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, despite pushback from environmental advocates. However, the small number of bids and bidders also demonstrated limited corporate interest in drilling in the controversial spot. The Arctic Refuge is in Alaska's northeast corner and is on the traditional homelands of two Native Alaskan peoples, and I am not going to attempt to try to pronounce those names. Unfortunately, this article does not have the pronunciation next to it. So rather than attempt to butcher it, I'm just not going to. It is about the size of South Carolina and contains wildlife including black, brown, and polar bears, caribou, wolves, wolverines, and 200 bird species. Whether or not to drill there has been the subject of significant partisan debate. Supporters of drilling say it could help the local economy and add to the nation's supply of oil. However, opponents argue that drilling such an ecologically sensitive area is not necessary and the land should be conserved. Trump administration celebrated the lease sale in a written statement, saying it would advance the country's oil interest. The Bureau of Land Management Director Steve Pierce said, quote, "This lease sale is another important step toward restoring American energy dominance and responsibly developing the vast resources Congress directed us to make available in the coastal plain. These leases will help create jobs, generate significant revenue for Alaska and the nation, and support the reliable domestic energy production Americans depend on every day." End quote. Yet, did we really need them? Probably not. Now, during his first administration, Trump, during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, required at least 2 lease sales to be held at the wildlife refuge. Of those sales, the first of those sales held at the very end of his first term also only got a couple of bids. The resulting leases were later canceled by the Biden administration. Required to by the tax law, the Biden administration also held a lease sale in the refuge, but it did not receive any bids. Now, last year's One Big Beautiful Bill required at least 4 lease sales. So they're requiring them, but they're not getting any bidders. Because as we talked about leading into the 2024 election, Donald Trump kept saying, "Drill, baby, drill. It's going to be great. It's going to make us so much money." The oil companies were saying at the time they didn't want to drill. Drilling was not going to fix this problem. And in fact, oil prices were not that high in 2024. What happened is people were comparing 2022 prices and saying, "Oh, look at how high gas is." They got in the habit of saying it, even though it was going down, and then it was just something they kept repeating because it was a way to go after the Biden administration. When this administration took over, at least around here, after November 2024, gas was sitting between 260, 280 a gallon. One of the last times I filled up, I was at 424, over $4 a gallon. And that was for the cheapest I could get that also worked in my vehicle. And it did contain ethanol, which means uh, it was not, um, you know, full oil based. And there's some argument whether or not ethanol goes and you burn through it quicker. Some say yes, some say no. I have farmers in my family who, if you tell them that you don't back ethanol for whatever reason, they'd almost disown you over it. Um, but the uh, lost my train of thought. But anyway, gas prices did not go down; they've gone up under Donald Trump. Specifically, as the longer the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, the higher they should climb. Now, of course, if they come to a deal, it may bounce back and forth here, as it looks like. We don't know how this conflict with Iran is going to go. Now, I mentioned that there was a bill passed by the House to limit the president's war powers authority. I have not seen that it has passed the Senate yet, but there is a chance Donald Trump could sign it, an outside chance, slim chance. Um, but he might do that to give himself an out and try to blame Congress for uh, passing it and saying, "Well, see, they passed it. You know, they're telling me I can't do it, so I'm going to sign it into law." And make it sound like he doesn't have any choice but to sign it, and hope that that's enough to calm his base about what's going on. All right, moving on. House GOP moves to codify Texas Department of War name change. Republicans on the House Armed Services Committee moved to codify the name change from Department of Defense to Department of War during a marathon session of debate over the annual defense policy bill. Lawmakers on the committee, in a party line vote, adopted the amendment to change the name. Representative Ronnie Jackson said, quote, "Now that you can see it firsthand how beautiful it actually is, you will have no choice but to vote for this amendment." I wrote, end quote. But this so far is just advancing it. I don't know if this is going to actually get through with a full House vote. Uh, Adam Smith of Washington, a Democrat, said, "I really think this is one of the dumbest things that has been done by this administration." End quote. Now, it is dumb. Changing the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War is unnecessary. It is expensive. By the time, and some of those expenses have already been paid unofficially, or I shouldn't say unofficially, but even without it being officially renamed, they did things like order business cards, order new signage, order new letterhead. But just because they did that, much like Donald Trump learned with the uh, Kennedy Center, you can't just rename it and have it go. Now, this is where they're going to try to push it through the uh, um, through Congress. Like I said, I don't know if it's going to pass a full House or a full House vote. Trump signed an executive order in early September to greenlight the name change. Uh, Now, many Republicans on Capitol Hill are referring to the department by the new name. I will refuse until this passes and gets signed into law. Despite the amendment's passage, the measure would need to go through the Senate, where it will face roadblocks as Democratic support will be needed. And that's the thing. I do believe they are going to need to get past the filibuster, and I just don't see 7 Democrats signing off on this. The only way they do is if Democrats get something out of it. I know a lot of people are not happy with the Democrats, um, but they're not the majority party right now. They have to do things a certain way as the minority party. Now, the Congressional Budget Office stated in its report in January that the name change could cost up to $125 million. See, that's the other thing. Republicans are always supposedly fiscally conservative when the other party is in office. When Democrats are in office, they're fiscally conservative. They're screaming about deficits and how much stuff costs. When they are in office, they spend money all the time. Now, the Department of War was established by former President George Washington in 1789. We kept that name until 1947 when the Truman administration split the Air Force and the Army and consolidated them with the Navy into the Department of Defense. And that's just a little history there of it. But I don't think it's going to actually go through. This is just more of Donald Trump wanting things and the Republicans being willing to actually give it to him. Now, got two articles here about the Lincoln Memorial and the Reflecting Pool. I am struggling today. The Reflecting Pool, and part of the reason I think I was struggling is because it involves the fool Donald Trump. But anyway, again, coming from the Hill, Trump teases Lincoln Memorial Promenade. President Trump unveiled plans Thursday for a new pedestrian promenade connecting the Lincoln Memorial to the Potomac River, the latest in a series of high-profile projects aimed at reshaping some of Washington's most recognizable landmarks. We're going to call it the Promenade. They want to call it the Trump Promenade, but I don't know if I want to do that, but it's going to be beautiful. The president told reporters at the White House. It's a beautiful project, and it's going to take the Lincoln Memorial right down to the Potomac, he added later, describing it as a long-awaited addition to the monument. Except I don't remember anybody ever asking for it or anybody ever talking about it until now. No details about the cost, timeline, or design have been revealed. The announcement comes as work wrapped up on the controversial overhaul of the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool. Water began filling the pool Wednesday after work crews repainted the basin with what Trump administration called American flag blue and sealed it from leaks. Trump argued the renovation was justified after receiving complaints about its appearance. The cost of the project was roughly $13 million, funded in part by National Park Service entrance fees. The Reflecting Pool project drew criticism from preservation advocates and prompted legal challenges. Critics claim that the administration bypassed normal review processes for change to a historic national landmark and altered a site closely associated with major monuments in American history, such as the late Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Now, Donald Trump doesn't care about any of the historical significance. He wants the fact that it supposedly has needed work for years, and that now he can say, well, see, I fixed it, and he can get credit. The basin held about 6.5 million gallons of water before a separate renovation in 2012, according to the National Park Service. The pool was later re-engineered to draw river water from the nearby tidal basin and run it through a more modern filtration system, though drought conditions often caused issues. Charles Burnham, founder of a local nonprofit Cultural Landscape Foundation, had sued, alleging the blue paint altered the site's character without proper authority. But that suit apparently went nowhere. The potential promenade and reflecting pool renovations just scratch the surface of ways Trump is looking to leave his mark on Washington, D.C. He has also promoted his $400 million White House ballroom project, which has already involved the demolition of the East Wing, plans to erect a 250-foot triumphal arch, a proposal for a National Garden of American Heroes, and other upgrade projects around the National Mall. Now, as far as his arch and one of the problems isn't so much the arch itself, even though we don't really need a 250-foot tall triumphal arch. Um, it's part of it. A big chunk of it is the location, is they want to put it basically right at the entrance to Arlington. And the thing about that is Arlington is not supposed to be about triumph and victory. It's supposed to be somber about because it's a graveyard. It is for American heroes who fell in battle. And Donald Trump doesn't understand that. He just wants the idea of building this big monument because, well, it's huge. Now, I said I had a connected story. Trump says the reflecting pool work wasn't simply a paint job. Uh, President Trump dismissed criticism of recent Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool renovations on Friday, rejecting claims that the project amounted to merely a paint job. Uh, on Truth Social, he said, quote, "The reflecting pool that stretches between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument was just opened to rave reviews, but maliciously or not, some say, like the Washington Post, it was a paint job. It was not a paint job. This was a highly sophisticated material, industrial strength that could last for 100 years, applied by very talented people, many of whom came from the great state of Oklahoma, where I won 77 out of 77 counties 3 times, the only president to ever do so. The material is thick, strong, flexible, and has a natural, beautiful color, the dark blue of the American flag," end quote. Except the color that it looked wasn't that. And the color, the way they were showing the images of what the reflecting pool was going to look like, didn't reflect the color that it was painted. And it's supposed to be like a mirror finish. You know how a mirror is just a piece of glass with a reflective surface behind it, effectively? That's what the reflecting pool was effectively uh, set up as. The water was effectively the glass. The sealant on the bottom, the paint was supposed to be the right color to reflect back um, and make it look kind of like a mirror. Now, he goes on to talk about the state of Oklahoma, and of course, he's got to throw his election wins out there. Only state where he won 77 out of 77 counties. Well, I'm not surprised with Oklahoma. Um, they ranked dead last in education, among other things, or if not dead last, pretty dang close to dead last. Um, but everything he's got to spin around and make it a way to brag about himself. The administration has defended the project as part of efforts to maintain and modernize aging mall infrastructure. Meanwhile, critics question the scope of the renovations and the process used to approve them because the reflecting pool was done by a no bid contract, and it was somebody that was connected to Donald Trump. Water was added back into the basin, which was drained earlier this week after work crews repainted the pool with what the Interior Department called American flag blue and sealed it from leaks. We've already talked about that. The lawsuit filed in district court reads, quote, "The dark gray achromatic basin was not incidental to the design, it was the design," end quote. That is exactly what I was talking about. Interior Department spokesman said President Trump has done more to make our nation's capital a shining beacon than any other president in the history of this country. I would argue no, in part because, for example, some of the original presidents, Washington, Jefferson, Adams, um, helped actually just even establish Washington, D.C. and start laying out some of the architecture and some of the things like that. How can he say that he did more? But see, these people around him have to stroke his ego. Everything is about Donald Trump's ego. Now, We still don't know what this promenade is going to look like, and how that is going to shape up when it comes to connecting the Potomac River to the Lincoln Memorial. Now, let's see, what else do I got here? All right, so a judge blocked a series of Trump's policies halting immigration processing. A federal judge on Friday vacated a series of President Trump's policies enacted in the wake of deadly attack on National Guard members, forcing immigration agencies to again process applications from citizens of nearly 40 countries. In the days surrounding last Thanksgiving, Trump barred the processing of any immigration application from those 39 travel ban countries, halting the ability to get green cards and leading to the widespread cancellation of naturalization ceremonies. He also put a stop to the processing of asylum claims from any country in order to review of all immigration benefits bestowed to those from 39 travel ban countries under former President Biden. Rhode Island-based U.S. District Judge John McConnell found all of it to be unlawful. He wrote in a 135-page ruling, quote, more than 6 months ago, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services enacted a series of policies that threw the lives of countless immigrants living in the United States into indeterminate legal limbo. The USCIS hold on educations cannot be attributed to anything that these individuals did wrong. Rather, it arises solely by the happenstance of their birth, end quote. The ruling is a major victory for immigrants and their advocates who had seen processing come to an abrupt halt, a pause that threatened to push some immigrants in the country legally on time-limited visas to overstay the bounds of their status. In his ruling, McConnell admonished the Trump administration for taking actions designed to unwind the lives of those lawfully immigrated to the U.S. Quote, in ruling on these motions, the court is reminded of a line often repeated in discussions around immigration policy. If people wish to immigrate to the United States, they ought to follow the law and do things the right way. This case serves as a perfect example of immigrants doing just that. But the rule of law has to apply to everyone equally, and as evident here, the USCIS has neither followed the law nor done things the right way. Indeed, the agency has violated the very immigration laws that Congress had charged it with administering, end quote. See, that's the thing we always hear from Republicans and MAGA. Oh, if you want to come here, just do it the right way, do it the right way, do it the right way. But that never happens. Like, when people do that, then they try to find loopholes and say, well, see, you're not doing it the way I want you to, or you're not coming from the country I want you to. So some of these people who were uh, basically in line doing things the right way to have their immigration status processed, it's now going to start resuming. They are going to be allowed to get their citizenship, etc. The ruling means that in addition to resuming processing immigration benefits, the administration will also need to schedule naturalization ceremonies for thousands of immigrants on the cusp of becoming U.S. citizens. The ruling was swiftly celebrated by immigration advocates who highlighted the problems their clients have experienced. For months, we have heard from Afghan allies whose citizenship ceremonies were canceled, work permits expired while waiting for decisions, green card applications stopped moving, and families were left in uncertainty despite doing everything the right way. Sean Van Diver, president of #AfghanEvac, said in a statement, quote, today's ruling is a significant victory for the rule of law and for thousands of Afghan allies and other immigrants who followed every requirement asked of them, only to see their cases froze indefinitely, end quote. And see, one of the things Donald Trump has routinely railed against asylum. And that's in part because he doesn't understand what asylum is, what asylum means. The only frame of reference he has for asylums are insane asylums like Arkham Asylum, if you are a DC fan. Now, we don't have places like that in this country. We don't have uh, asylum penitentiary type style um, things where they take people who are mentally unwell. Yes, we do have mental hospitals, and those can have, um, you know, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Not jail settings, forced stays for their own safety, for the safety of others, those kind of things. But it's not quite the same as what he thinks of when he thinks of asylum, especially because of how many times he talks about, well, oh, they're coming here, they're emptying their asylums and they're sending them here. They're pouring over the borders here. They're the worst of the worst, and all of the things he says. It's because he doesn't understand what the word asylum means. Donald Trump is not an intellectually smart man. He doesn't understand that words have multiple meanings in some cases, and that in the case of asylum, while it can mean the institution that he is thinking of, it can also mean basically safety, safe harbor, protection from their home country. It is not safe for these people to return to their country of origin. And we at least should, and we are required by treaties we have signed with other countries to at least hear it out and see what's going on. But Donald Trump doesn't understand. And now a federal judge has said that his attempt to block immigrants coming in, doing things the right and the legal way, um, was unlawful. The courts keep stepping up and telling Donald Trump and this administration that he is not doing things the right way. Right now, they are the only safeguard because Democrats don't have enough power in Congress to stop much. All they can do is block as much as they can with the uh, filibuster in the Senate, but they can't block everything with that filibuster. All right, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope you have a great day, and I will be back again tomorrow with yet another podcast.